when it falls off the front page of the newspapers, the fallout from the Trump Justice Department's extraordinary decision to dismiss the criminal corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams is still playing out, with 3 more federal prosecutors resigning in protest today from the Southern District of New York. They have previously been suspended for refusing to drop the charges against Mayor Adams. In their resignation letter, the prosecutors allege that Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche placed a condition on reinstating them to their posts, that they, quote, must express regret and admit some wrongdoing by the office in connection with the refusal to move to dismiss the case, end quote. Of that demand, they write this, quote, we will not confess wrongdoing when there was none. We have served under presidents of both parties, advancing their priorities while pursuing justice without fear or favor. Now, the department has decided that obedience supersedes all else, requiring us to abdicate our legal and ethical obligations in favor of directions from Washington. That is wrong. Joining our coverage is former White House attorney during the first Trump administration, Ty Cobb, one of several former insiders who have signed a letter rebuking their old boss's efforts to weaponize the Department of Justice against other former Trump officials. We'll read from that letter in a second. But we are also still joined by our friend David Jolly. Ty Cobb, it's a pleasure to have you here. I've covered many of the things you've been involved with, but never had a chance to talk to you before. And I wonder if you could weigh in on Todd Blanche. As someone who was once an attorney for Donald Trump, why would someone like Mr. Blanche, who had worked at the department himself, allow these great attorneys and career public servants to leave because they refused to bend the law for him?
Well, it's very nice to be with you. Thanks for having me, and it's good to be on with the congressman, who I respect greatly. The issue with regard to Blanche here is somewhat answered by the difference between his service and mine. He was Trump's personal attorney. I actually represented the office of the presidency. I didn't represent Trump individually, so it was slightly a different thing. And his loyalty has always been to the man, and it's still, unfortunately, to the man. If you'll recall the occasion when Trump came to address the Great Hall of the Justice Department and was introduced by Pam Bondi, who took an oath to, protect and serve the Constitution, but declared in that moment her fealty to Trump and dedicated her entire staff to that cause. That's unprecedented in American history. It's not unusual to have personal attorneys or former personal attorneys for a president or people close to a president, like Bobby Kennedy was to his brother or John Mitchell was to Nixon, although the John Mitchell to Nixon parallel is frankly probably relevant here because her lawlessness has already drawn the commentary of the Fourth Circuit and probably cost the Justice Department the centuries-old presumption of regularity that allowed the Supreme Court and other courts to accept government representations as true. So I think the sad thing here with Blanche is he, like Bondi, like Emile Bovee, have clearly put their loyalty and fealty in the hands of the president rather than honoring their obligation to serve the Constitution.
Where does that end? I mean, where does that land us as a country?
So it lands us in a very sad place because historically, the Justice Department has been a collaborator along with the Article III judiciary in fashioning and tempering the rule of law throughout our historical evolution. The Justice Department's job to present the interests and beliefs of the executive branch and the judiciary's obligation to take that into consideration, but carry out the contemplative obligations that they have to weigh whether the government through the executive branch is overreaching. Has been a back and forth that's been a collaboration over time, but now because of her abject defiance and disrespect, which has drawn the interest of judges, including the Supreme Court now, and certainly Judge Harvey Wilkinson from the Fourth Circuit last week when he highlighted the fact that her conduct and that of her department was likely to cause great difficulties for the country unless they abandoned that course and resumed a dedication to the Constitution. We're going to be in a bad place, and I think we're already there, given the number of individual vengeance-oriented cases that you see, the law cases against law firms, the cases against Mr. Krebs, Mr. Turner, the executive orders that the Justice Department is trying to help enforce that are clearly unconstitutional and violations of the First Amendment. I think we're going to be in a very difficult circumstance, put a lot of pressure on the courts. I think the courts are up to it, but unfortunately the courts weren't designed as an immediate response team. And of course, sadly, we have the legislature, which the congressman can speak to, but the legislature has been neutered by its own cowardice. They're really not even participating in this war that's going on for the future of our country.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect description of where we are, neutered by cowardice. I mean, what does Mitch McConnell have to lose? I want to bring David Jolly into this as well. I mean, David Jolly, Mitch McConnell is someone who has talked about the courts, who seem to work. I remember interviewing him in 2016 on the set of Morning Joe about his support for Donald Trump. And he had in his pocket a list of all the judges that Trump had promised to appoint, and it was his rationale for his endorsement of Donald Trump. All those judges are now screaming as loud as a judge can scream about Donald Trump doing things that are both unconstitutional and illegal.
Yeah, Nicole, look, I think Ty's exactly right. The courts are doing fairly well, certainly not in all cases. There's been a lot of room for criticism. But I think the important thing here that Ty's speaking to is there is a latency for the courts to respond to a national emergency and to a chief executive who is acting outside of his constitutional authority. And in this case, a Department of Justice who's no longer a collaborator with the Article III courts. And so the other role of Mitch McConnell is not just to appoint the judges that administer accountability through the judicial branch, albeit with some latency, but the role of the Congress and of the legislature is to be the first people at the fire when it occurs. I mean, the ultimate powers of oversight and impeachment could be done in a week if necessary. And you could argue right now, Donald Trump has confronted and belittled the power of the legislative branch through violations of the Impoundment Act. He certainly belittled and ignored the powers of the judicial branch by both the suspension of due process as an administration of justice under the Department of Justice, but by ignoring the courts. And so what is the answer? What is the immediate answer? Who should be first to the fire when a chief executive is violating the Constitution as Donald Trump is? That's a political question for the Congress to step in the breach and say, no, Mr. President, we're not going to allow you to do that. But they've collapsed in among themselves. And I think the national anxiety here, Nicole, is that we are watching institutions and systems fail. Institutions that took centuries to build are failing before our eyes, and they can't just be rebuilt overnight. Donald Trump is doing enormous damage with his allies in this administration to systems that are centuries old right now.